Hello everybody, you're very welcome to this episode of Object-Oriented Programming. In this episode we're continuing on the theme of strings and serialization. So in particular what we're going to look at this week is how to serialize an object. So serializing an object is a term that's used in object-oriented programming, and it means how to save it to a file essentially. We know that's important because we've been looking at examples like lists of customers and orders and things like that. Realistically speaking, if I was running a Python program that took in all the orders, and then as you know, when the Python program finishes, all the data goes away, that'd be no good at all. So we have to save the objects to a file. The same way in the past we've looked at how we'd save data to a file. So it gives a permanent storage to the information. And in normal object-oriented programming languages, we call the process of saving an object to a file, we call that serializing it. And when we write the file back into a new object ID, we call that deserializing. That's the general OO term, but in Python, there is a special term for it. It's called pickling. So when we pickle the file, it means we serialize it or save it to we save an object to a file, we're pickling it, and we unpickle it. If we deserialize it, that is, we write the saved file into an object again. So that's why I have a little picture of a pickle up there, just to show that's pickling. So there is a library called pickle, and we import pickle, and then we have methods in the pickle library call. We've one called dump, and what dump does is it writes the information from an object into a file type structure. So our syntax is pickle.dump the object into a file. So it means write out whatever data we have into permanent storage on the file. Simple. Let's look at some code for it. It's let's look at this one. It's open a file name pickled_list.p for write and as a byte. And we'll open that file using the variable name myFile, and then all we do is pickle dump my file into my object into my file. A few comments. In a lot of books on Python, and indeed in a lot of websites, they don't use the .p extension to represent the file name, so they just have pickled_list. I think that's a bit confusing, and I always like to give files an extension. So by calling it a .p, I'm saying, this is the pickle file, this is the file I'm storing it into. So whatever your object is, my object, I'm writing it into pickled_list.p. And it's a kind of a byte file. And it serializes the object or pickles it, saves the object into that pickled_list.p. You will see plenty of examples where there isn't a .p. I kind of insist upon it. I think it's just good practice so that the person reading the code knows that that's the name of a file and not anything else. So we'll look at the opposite now. If we want to take a file if we want to take the data from a file and load it into memory, then we use the load method. So the load method is simply says the new object is assigned pickle.load of the file name. So if the file name is pickled_list.p, we just put in pickle.load pickled_list.p. So let's look at an example. An example is open pickled_list.p for read only. So we don't need to open the file for write here, because we're just taking that file, reading it, and then creating a new object called myNewObject, and we're loading the data from the file into it. So that's all we're doing. We're loading the information from the file into an object. So dump takes the object information and puts it into a file. Load takes it from the file and puts it into an object. So here's a look at the code. Here's a program to do that process. We're creating an object. In this case, it's just a list, and it's got 5 values. It's got a list is 1 containing another one, 5, the number 5. Values including list, and then in brackets an inner list. So it's got a bunch of information in it. We import the pickle module, then we open the file as my file and dump it out to my object, and then we load that my file back into my new object. 2 things of note there. We import the pickle function as we import anything else. I added in the keyword with there. Instead of just saying open, I say with, and what with means is that as soon as I've opened the file and I've done all the operations on it, when pickle.dump is finished executing, it will automatically close the file afterwards. If I don't use the term with, then those files will always remain open. Because when you open a file, you have to explicitly close it as well. And if you look back on the file management code we looked at, you'll remember that there was an open and close method. If you just do with open, that does both open and close. We also have another two methods like dump and load called dump s and load s. It's back from the olden days in Python when you could load and dump string type objects, but they behave almost exactly like the dump and load method. The only difference is they don't accept data of the type we were looking at from objects. What they accept is byte or executable type code. So it's 1100 kind of stuff. If we have binary strings, if we have locations of ports, database addresses and things like that, things that aren't stored as either characters or numbers but are stored as complex values, then we can use the dump s method to store an object and the load s method to restore an object. So for byte type objects and classes. And then just a note on serializing web objects. So sometimes we need to we're transmitting objects over the web, and sometimes when we receive them, we need to save them to file and restore them to file. So there are all kinds of formats or standards for transmitting information over the web. I'm sure everybody will have heard of things like XML, which is a standard. If I want to send an order to a company, I mightn't send it as on paper. I might send it as a marked up file, like HTML kind of XML marked up. There's another markup language called yet another markup language, YAML. I might send over the order as comma-separated values. But the most common web standard for sending files from one place to another is called JSON, J-S-O-N. That's the JSON standard, and it stands for JavaScript Object Notation, doesn't matter. It's an open standard though, that is, it's free for everyone to use, and it's relatively human readable and language independent. It's derived from JavaScript, and all file names of JSON type have a .json extension. Let's look at some JSON code. So this would be an example of JSON script. If I was sending you an order and I was just sending my name, my age, and my address information, it's like this. So it's just curly brackets. It's got a label and then the value of that label. So it's really easy to read and understand. It's very simple. And if I want to create a sublist, like address is there, I just put a second set of angle braces in. So this is how most messages are sent over the internet, really. It's with these curly brackets to indicate when the message starts and finishes, and sub-curly brackets if I want to indicate sub-information within. All information that is sent over the web starts off with a label as to what I'm sending, and then an instance of that label. So for example, first name, and then John. So I would have a program on the sending side saying, send it over in this format, and then I'd have a program on the receiving side that says, I'm expecting to receive data in first name, last name, age, and address order. But if I get it in age, first name, last name, address order, it doesn't matter, because I can just read the labels, and then I'll know to put the correct values in the correct locations on this side. So if I get sent this information, it is good that Python has a specific library to deal with this kind of data. So if I need to save this to disk, write it to a file, and then rewrite it out, Java provides something equivalent to the pickle method, which is the JSON method to deal with JSON files. So instead of saying import pickle, we say import JSON. And JSON has libraries just like pickle. It has a dump and a load, and a dump s and a load s. And the calls are exactly the same as the calls to pickle, except you instead of saying pickle.dump, you say json.dump. So for this specific file type, JSON files, there's a specific library for it that does little fiddly things like parse it and things like that very nicely. And really, instead of getting an object saved to disk, you're getting a JSON file saved to disk. And instead of loading an object, you're loading a JSON file, which is grand. So in terms of the efficacy of this is very helpful. So that is serialization, really, put together. Serialization just means saving it to disk, saving it to a file. If I serialize an object, it means I'm saving the object to disk as a file. Or I could call that pickling it, or if I deserialize it or load it back up from file into an object in a running program, we could call that unpickling as well. With JSON, it's the same. I'm pickling a JSON file and unpickling a JSON file. So that's really the end of strings and serializations. Thanks very much. We'll see you on the next episode.